This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, we'll be recording as we are right now, and I'll be sending out a link to the recording and the videos, and it'll also have some additional information, our guidelines for operating your community drainage system and a few other pieces of information that'll be helpful. And that'll be coming out in a few days, probably Monday. I'm also going to be sending out a survey, so if you could fill that out and help us, this way we can do a better job next year. I think the online meeting presentation is a great way to go. It allows a lot of people to participate. So hopefully this being our first trial run, we'll work out all of the kinks. And also it's about 2 hours, so we're going to take a little 10-minute break in between sessions. We have 4 agenda items, and in the middle we'll take a little break. So the agenda for today are, we're going to talk about hurricanes, and we're going to talk about 5 water management lessons that we want to share with you. That is less about how to prepare and make a kit, and more about what you need to look for as a water manager as the hurricane season arrives and we deal with the storms. We're going to look at drainage from the regional, local, and neighborhood system. We're going to look at flooding factors and considerations. And then, of course, we're going to give you some maintenance tips. So the speaker for today is Tommy Stroud. Tommy's our executive director here at the Lake Worth Drainage District. He has a world of information. Prior to joining us, he worked for the South Florida Water Management District in many different positions. He's also been in the private sector and has really more than 35 years of experience in water management and construction and local drainage systems. So he's an excellent speaker. I think you're really going to enjoy the presentation. I am going to click here and we're going to start. So if you're ready, let's give it a whirl.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. Good morning. If for some reason you can't hear me or have trouble hearing me, type in the little chat box there, and that'll notify us that we're having some technical issues that we'll need to deal with. Again, I really thank you all for attending. Today is kind of a great example of why we're all paying attention to this subject. Obviously, we have rain showers coming in that are influenced by a tropical system that's out in the Gulf right now, and we have a hurricane out in the Atlantic. So game on. We're here to try to deal with these issues as they affect South Florida, and we need your help and assistance and cooperation for it to be successful. So today we're going to talk about 5 water management lessons that we want to share regarding hurricanes in South Florida. I can't, it's not changing the slide.
It's not changing it.
Changing it. Perfect. And this graphic is probably the best illustration of why we should pay attention to this. This is a plot of all the tropical storms and hurricanes between 1851 and 2006. And you can see Florida is in the heart of that big black mass of lines. And we are at risk, literally at any point in the hurricane season, of being impacted by a tropical system, whether it be rain or wind, or in the unfortunate case, both. Next slide. The physical development of a hurricane is kind of important to understand. The hurricanes are more complicated than they appear on the radar that we see in our weather reports and on computers, etc. Hurricanes has 4 main parts that make up the physical composition of a hurricane. We have the eye, which is right in the center. You're all familiar with that. The eye wall, which is the band right around the eye. The rain bands that are associated with the larger structure of the system, and then the overlying cloud cover. As air rushes around, like on a pinwheel or a carousel, not unlike a water going down a drain, at the same time it's moving around, the air is moving inward toward the eye of the storm. And the winds come in at the bottom, and then at the eye acts like a chimney. And then the air goes up the chimney to the upper stratosphere. And that portion of the hurricane is critical to the wind speed. If you've got a well-formed eye, you have a well-formed chimney. And if that air can get into the eye and move up, the system is going to bend faster, and then you're going to have increased winds that we'll talk about in the categorization of these storms. When you have upper level winds that sort of blow the top off the chimney, it's harder for these systems to generate. So whenever you hear the weathermen talk about upper level winds, that has a dampening effect in some cases on hurricane. Oh, thank you. The categories are a way that the National Weather Service, National Hurricane Center, tries to identify for us the severity with regard to wind speed of hurricanes, and there are 5 categories. The first category is wind speeds of 74 to 95 miles an hour. And on the graphic you see here, it kind of gives you an indication of the type of damage that's done typically by these categories of storms. And it gives you examples. If you can remember back in history, some of these examples, you can kind of see the relationship. Obviously, our major concern is wind speed because of all the damage and disruption that can occur that can get in the way of or prevent us from responding to another aspect of the hurricane, which is rainfall. So we have to look both at rainfall and wind speed. All right. Jump back. But this category, right, really just affects wind speed. There are no categories or identification of severity of rainfall, because you can have a tropical storm that drops excessive amounts of rain because it's slow moving, versus a category 5, which may drop an equivalent amount of rain, but it's moving very fast. So a lot of those factors play into what we deal with as water management. The 2019 Atlantic hurricane season was a very busy season. There were 18 storms named, 6 were hurricane, and 3 of those were major hurricanes. Hurricane Dorian impacted the Bahamas, Humberto impacted Bermuda, and Lorenzo impacted the Azores. 6 tropical storms affected the U.S., including Dorian and Barry as hurricanes. And this is the point I like to make. Regardless of the activity of the season that is forecast, we have to pay attention whether it's an active year or inactive year. And I'll give you 2 examples of that. If you remember back in 1992, Hurricane Andrew hit southern Miami-Dade County. Devastating damage occurred from that storm. It was one of 3 storms that formed that year. So the year that we were hit by the worst storm in Florida's history was one of the least active years that we had. And you've probably seen in recent history where we've had 20 or in 2019, 18 named storms, and really weren't very much affected by those. So regardless of the forecast activity, we really need to pay attention to the hurricane season and realize that we can be hit literally any year. There's also no such thing as a fish storm. That's a term you hear of a hurricane that's just sort of noodling around out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. However, we do feel impacts from those. Maybe they may not always be in Florida, but they could be some portion of the Caribbean, Bermuda, or the Azores. And there can be associated loss of life with that. So it's important not only to watch the track or the cone of the storm, but recognize that we could be impacted by waves that create storm surges higher than normal tides, rip currents, and then rainfall associated with inland flooding. In the history, we've had storms at the eye of the storm went in Key West, but the majority of the rain fell in Palm Beach County. So even great distances, we can still be significantly affected. Hurricane Dorian was a Cat 5 that killed 70 people in the Bahamas, 60 people on Acapulco, and 10 people in Grand Bahama. And the second deadliest storm in 2019 was Lorenzo. It was a Cat 5, and it was one of those storms referred to as the fish storm, but it killed over 19 people. There were 11 offshore deaths due to the sinking of a tugboat that was out in the Pacific near the Azores. The vessel was about 1,200 miles off of French Martinique. And Lorenzo caused 8 rip current deaths in the United States between Florida and Rhode Island. And of course, forecasts aren't perfect. You're all familiar with the spaghetti plots that we see on the evening news, weather reports. And each one of those tracks is a model run of the forecasted path of a hurricane or tropical system. And you see, as in this example, and it's fairly common, there's a lot of divergence, particularly later in the forecast, or as you move away in the forecast. And it's important not to fixate on any one of those, but to recognize that there's a lot of uncertainty and variability that the professionals, weather forecasters at the National Hurricane Center, are dealing with. They look at each one of these models in great detail. They understand where the models have their strong points, where models may have their weak points, and that factors into their decision as to which model to follow. Obviously, we don't have that expertise. We rely on the Weather Center to sort of sort through the scores, but it's good to have this information available to us in real time that we can look to and kind of see the uncertainty facing the Hurricane Center forecasters. This is a graph that kind of shows the improvement in forecasts from the 1960s to today. Example of several models, there's 4 of them, the global forecast system, the European models, the United Kingdom models, are all ones that you see and hear talked about on the evening news. And the forecast reflects a lot of data over the years, and that data has been used to improve the capability of these models. And it's important to recognize that, you know, models have different strengths and weaknesses. So, you know, a model may have done a really good job predicting a Gulf of Mexico storm, but it may be particularly poor at predicting an Atlantic hurricane. So, you know, that's why the professionals at the National Hurricane Center, we rely on them to sort through that spaghetti and come up with a reliable forecast for the positions of these storms. The graph shows basically the error in nautical miles on the vertical axis, and then the forecast period, how far into the future. And as you might expect, the further into the future you try to predict these storms, the more error that's involved. Now, we've seen dramatic improvement in the forecastability of these models from the 1980s, when there really weren't very many, if any, computer models available, until today in 2010. Now, you might want to say, well, but by the time we're only 12 to 24 hours out, all the models should agree. Well, obviously, their agreement is greater the shorter into the future we look. But if you look at the first 12 hours, you'll see that there's probably 30, 40, maybe in some cases 50 miles error. Remember Hurricane Dorian last year came through the Bahamas, and it made a dramatic turn to the north right after it exited Bahamas. That forecast was predicted, fortunately, But the error here shows that it could have easily been wrong, and that storm could have continued to slide west and make landfall directly on West Palm Beach. So the error on these models, even in the short-term forecast, we need to recognize is there and understand the risk that that proposes. Oops. Right, this is not working.
Try it now.
There we go. Thank you. And the other thing, whoops, and the other thing to point out to and understand that, you know, even though the hurricanes have an eye and on a map, that's a very fine point, and certainly we're concerned about where that makes landfall or how it affects us. But that in these forecasts made by the National Weather Center, they're showing us this cone of probable impact, which is a cone that says the eye can be anywhere within this area and still be within the forecast made by the National Hurricane Center. And hurricanes can cause wind damage far outside of this cone as well. So that you're not held harmless if you happen to fall outside of the cone at any one time. So we need to stay vigilant, even if our area turns out to be just outside the cone. A small deviation within the cone can significantly change the impacts to the surrounding area. And as we talked about earlier, damage is measured not just by the category, but by the physical size of the storm, the speed of the storm, and when it can make landfall with regard to tides. And if you think back last year to Hurricane Dorian, it was almost the worst case scenario. It was very wet. It was moving very slowly. And it was a Category 5. And that's probably about the worst combination of factors that you could expect. Because when it moves slow, those high winds have a longer time to push against trees, push against buildings. It also has a longer time that there can be excessive rainfall, so you could expect excessive flood. And there's a longer period through which it can force storm surges up and inland. So when you have a major storm like Dorian that moves very slowly, it's one you really have to pay attention to. And Category 1s can cause significant damage, again, depending on their speed and track. Since 2010, the U.S. Category 1 hurricanes caused 175 direct fatalities and over $100 billion in damages. Social science matters. We tend to forget bad experiences, experiences particularly that influence people's future decision. A lot of times, from past experience, well, the hurricane wasn't that bad, the last one that is. And there's a tendency for us to dismiss or diminish the potential risk because we haven't been impacted before. So we want to, if we focus on the category too much, we can also kind of lure ourselves into a false sense of security. That's only a Category 1. Well, it doesn't mean you're going to avoid flooding, flooding damages, and you can still have wind generated damages from trees that fall over in a Category 1. We had a tropical storm a few years ago on our rights of way. We had 75 trees fall in what was literally the winds from a tropical storm. So we always have to pay attention to these systems, even regardless of the strength. And we need to communicate often and use effectively multiple communication platforms, whether they be social media, print, email, or face-to-face, or telephone conversations, or meetings like this. We definitely need to communicate because every storm presents a different spectrum of risk, and it's good that we're talking and communicating to best understand. Yeah, there are a lot of challenges in communicating risk, and the list of bullets here kind of give you some examples of things we sort of commonly hear. My house was elevated. I thought we'd be fine. How is it I had flood damage? Or it's never flooded here before. The one you hear is they always turn, and that's probably not untrue, but it's where they turn becomes the issue. And then the most explicit frustration I hear as a water manager is that I thought these floods come only once every 100 years. And unfortunately, when the FEMA flood management system came up in an effort to try to describe risk, they used a 100-year storm as kind of a benchmark. But what that really means is there's a 1% chance any year that you can have that type of rainfall. So just because you had a 100-year event last year doesn't mean you're not going to get hit with a 100-year event in a subsequent year. Matter of fact, in 1999 and 2000, 2 tropical storms each in one of those years hit Miami-Dade County with about the exact same rainfall, which was in excess of a 100-year event. So within 1 year, Miami-Dade had 2 100-year events. A lot of times people feel that they live a long distance from the coast, they shouldn't expect damages. Well, it's true that as hurricanes move inland, they tend to dissipate. But remember, if it comes on shore as a Category 1, as a 5, it could easily impact you as a Category 4. And in Wilma several years ago, it actually came in through the Everglades and continued to intensify because the energy from the water in the Everglades. So a lot of factors play into this, and really, bottom line is none of us are exempt or immune from these impacts. And remember, it's water that kills. There's an old saying in the hurricane history that says you run from water, you hide from wind. Because the water is really the most dangerous aspect of this. And it's one of the reasons we here at Lake Worth Drainage District, it's really one of our sole objectives in water resource management. We deal with flood control and water supply. And our flood control operation is dominated by needing to address the impacts of hurricanes of the tropical system. Water accounts for approximately 90% of the direct fatalities in the United States. In the 2016 through 2018 tropical season, more than half of the water-related fatalities were related to vehicles, street flooding, or situations where someone mistakenly took a flooded canal as a flooded road because they look identical. You can't tell the difference from your car. Washouts or road failures, and then of course traffic accidents associated with the inclement weather. Another lesson, in fact, water that kills, 3 recent catastrophic hurricanes. We had record-setting rainfall, life-threatening flooding, high property damage, and climate effects will continue to impact us in the hurricane seasons, whether it's through more hurricanes as far as their number, or whether they're just more intense with regard to wind and rainfall. And of course, as sea level rise continues, it adds pressure to inland drainage facilities, both along the coast and well inland. We can get into details about those later. Oh, there we go.
Go ahead.
There we go. There we go. Another lesson is the storm's timeline. And it's the old saying, it's not over till it's over. There are a lot of injuries that occur after after the storm has passed, when people are starting to get out and move around. And that's particularly true if there are a lot of flooded streets, and we'll talk some more about that in a minute. The most frequent factor, in the loss of life, factor to cardiovascular, or to the loss of electricity, or to motor vehicle accidents. There are 8 times as many victims over 60 years of age compared to under 21.
You see the chat?
Cardiovascular deaths are the largest associated with that. You try to-
Hold on. I think that's. Okay.
There we go. And the storm's timeline is important. It's not about your timeline, it's about the storm's timeline. Hurricane Florence was 10 days plus that we were watching the slow-moving storm. Hurricane Michael, however, we were given 3 to 4 days notice before landfall. And there have been some tropical storms that have formed off the coast of Cuba and come into South Florida within a 24-hour period. So the duration through which we may be reacting to these storms is highly variable. And our safety is really about being ready, being prepared so we can act immediately. There's lots of agency and free publication with tips about storm preparation. You need to get supplies, evacuation kits, plan your routes, plan where you're going to stay if you're in evacuation. And of course, keep tuned to local weather and consider weather radio.
Okay.
You just stuck it, we'll change the slide.
Just click in the thing every time I do something. Go ahead, Tommy.
Next.
There you go.
Okay. So if you have any questions, again, type them out on the little chat box that we have. And we'll be happy to answer them. Here's some links that we encourage you to go check out.
You can, but every time you mess
Now,
with
and
this,
let's say the
you
next
mess with it.
hurricane
Yep.
that threatens us. There's the ready.gov, which is a national website related to hurricanes and other risks. Obviously, stay tuned to the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, particularly the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center. The Red Cross is a good source of information for planning for storms, and probably the best real-time summary of weather that you can find in South Florida is at the website of the South Florida Water Management District. They have two full-time meteorologists on staff, and their expertise is tropical systems. So they don't do an independent forecast from the National Hurricane Center, but their website has a lot of information that you don't readily see from the National Hurricane Center's website. And they're recognized nationally and internationally as experts on tropical systems as well. So I encourage you to visit the South Florida Water Management District website. And then, of course, the Federal Emergency Management Agency with regard to flooding, flood risk, flood potential, et cetera, is also a good website.
Tommy, we have one question.
Sure.
Are most of the flooding deaths from storm surge or rain? I read that Florida southeast coast isn't too conducive to storm surge. Something about the depth of the ocean floor shore.
Right. Yeah, that's correct. I mean, we do have storm surges that affect primarily the area right on the beach, and because the intercoastal waterway, some of the areas within the near shore. And because people are pretty good, live in those areas, are pretty good about evacuating, there aren't a lot of deaths associated with forecasted storm surge impact. So when the warning is given that there's going to be a storm surge, people generally adhere to those warnings and promptly evacuate. So the deaths on the coast are less than inland, is your point, and it's a good one. Those deaths occur primarily associated with automobile travel. It's not that someone is in their home and they drown because of flooding in their home. It's because they got out in their car, they're driving on a flooded street. You can't tell the depth of the water when you're driving. It can be shallow at one location and then get deep very quickly as you move into it. And as I mentioned earlier, a flooded road and a flooded canal look identical from the perspective of your car. And I can't tell you, it seems like it would be rare, but unfortunately it's not, that people driving in a flooded condition will see a flooded canal, mistake it for a flooded street, and turn into it. And then, unfortunately, fatalities associated.
I don't see any other questions, so I'd like to move on.
Move on. The next we're going to talk about drainage, regional, local, and neighborhood drainage systems. And they're all interrelated. We're going to talk about that as we move forward. A little bit on the drainage history. This agency, Lakeward Drainage District, was created in 1915. So we have a long history of drainage and flood control efforts, particularly in southeastern Palm Beach County. Prior to 1950, there were a lot of real estate promoters that sold hundreds of acres of undrained land, touting Florida's tropical paradise. The president of the Palm Beach Farms Company, Percy Hagerman, saw the potential development, but he recognized he had to get rid of the water in order for anybody to be interested in purchasing land, moving into South Florida. Orrin Randolph, who was Lakeward Drainage District's first chief engineer, executive director, told Hagerman of an idea that he had of using ditches to divert the water. And together, Randolph and Hagerman succeeded in dredging 70 miles of drainage canals in the early 1900s, which was quite an effort. If you look at the second photograph from the top there near the right, you'll see an old dredge. Those floating dredges are what they use to excavate many of the canals that we rely on today that you see in and around your neighborhoods. Engineers enhanced water management by building water control structures and pumps to hold or release water as needed. Our drainage system serves two purposes. It obviously discharges water when there's a risk of flooding. Like today, we have rain and our gates are opening in response to that to let any excess water out. But when it's dry, we hold the water back and use it to recharge the underlying groundwater aquifers that we rely on to pump water out, to treat it, and to send it to our homes and businesses. So we play every day, we're doing one or the other of those two functions to try to address the water needs of South Florida. One of the biggest changes after the 1915 dredgings that occurred was the Clean Water Act of 1972, which put in place federal and then state and local requirements for dealing with stormwater. Prior to that, the stormwater discharge was unregulated. You could discharge at any rate, any quality. There were no retention or detention systems that we see today in the form of internal lakes and ponds for stormwater quantity and quality. Flood protection, for the most part, was via swales, ditches, or just local ponding on undeveloped land. The Clean Water Act, through permitting, regulates the discharge of pollutants into the water from point and non-point sources. So whether it's coming out of a pipe or whether it's flowing overland, like the top photograph, from one parcel into another, the Clean Water Act regulates the movement of pollutants through these various sources with the goal to ensure that surface water meets standards that are necessary for human water consumption, sports, and recreation. And it affects the way community systems are designed, because while the purpose of the Clean Water Act is to deal with water quality, they recognized they had to consider flood control in that overall goal. And so they integrated flood control aspects into the regulations that address water quality. Since the 1970s, development standards for drainage systems have been regulated to ensure flood protection and water quality. So since 1970, the developments that were constructed meet those Clean Water Act standards, and therefore have very specific standards for drainage and flood control as well. The stormwater lakes and ponds that you see in your neighborhood are not there solely as amenities. They are required to retain some volume of stormwater on site. The type of rains like we're having today, it could rain today, it could rain again tomorrow, it could rain a week from now. Those ponds are designed to absorb that water and slowly bleed it out so as to avoid flood impacts, but also to improve the quality of the water. It allows pollutants to settle before discharging it into another downstream water body. The drainage flood control system of a pond is really designed to protect the finished floors of your homes and businesses. What this allows, however, is flooding in yards, streets, and parking lots during rain events. You know, it's obvious to be concerned about flooding in your streets, but it's important that you recognize that is designed into the function of your system. In excessive rains, like we see in South Florida, streets, open areas, your front yard, your backyard, all of those are expected to be flooded with the goal of protecting the finished floors of homes and businesses. And as part of that effort, we have a three-tiered system, and each tier has to work well and has to work in coordination with the other tiers in order to function. We have South Florida Water Management District that manages the regional tier of entities like Lake Worth Drainage District or Palm Beach County generally handle the second tier, and then residential communities or business are responsible for dealing with the drainage on their property. And this coordinated effort that I mentioned is needed to ensure the stormwater is discharged at the proper rate and time for flood control purposes, while retaining as much water as possible for water conservation, water quality, and other environmental reasons. And it is to kind of compare the system to other similar systems, it's a lot like our drainage system functions like a roadway system. You have the major interstates like I-95 or the Turnpike. They're managed by the state of Florida, and in many cases, like I-95, they're constructed by the federal government. The secondary system is constructed by local entities like Lake Worth Drainage District, Palm Beach County. And then the third part of the system are the local communities where you construct and maintain your internal roadways, and you have similar responsibility for your internal drainage system. So as I mentioned, Tier 1 is kind of a state-federal partnership to deal with flooding, particularly in South Florida. And South Florida Water Management District is one of 5 water management districts statewide. They're a regional governmental agency that manage water resources over the southern part of the state. And it covers 16 counties from Orlando to Florida Keys with a population of almost 9 million residents. And it operates a complex regional flood control system that has over 2,000 miles of canals and levees, 600 water control structures, hundreds and hundreds of culverts, and over 70 stormwater pumping stations, which is an enormous amount of horsepower when you compare it to other parts of the state or even the country. South Florida Water Management District's role is to monitor weather conditions and water levels around the clock. In that picture on the upper right, that's a picture of their water control room at South Florida Water Management District. About 10 years, 15 years ago, I used to run that room. It operates 24 hours a day. There are people there at midnight on Christmas, on New Year's, Easter, pick any holiday, any time of the day. There are people in that room whose sole purpose is to monitor water conditions and react by opening gates, turning on pumps, et cetera, et cetera. So it's quite an operation if you ever get a chance to take a look at it. During and after heavy rains, they route excess water through waterways to storage or coastal discharge points. And they coordinate stormwater discharges with municipalities and drainage districts like us, Lake Worth Drainage District. And I can tell you personally, on a typical heavy rain event, I'm not talking necessarily hurricanes or tropical storms, but just we get 6 to 8 inches of rain, I'm generally on the phone with the control room telling them what we are doing and coordinating our operation with their operation. So we operate very, very closely with the South Florida Management. And again, that's describing our Tier 2 local system. We have, within the Lake Worth Drainage District, which on that graphic is kind of the purplish pink area, it's over 200 square miles in heavily populated areas, southeastern Palm Beach County. Western areas has a lot of agriculture. The eastern area has a lot of high density residential. We have 500 miles of canals and right of ways. We have 50 lateral canals that run east and west, and they're spaced out about every half mile. And we have 5 equalizer canals that run north and south. So it's a very effective system for managing both flood control and water supply issues. The annual non-ad valorem assessment, in other words, what taxpayers are assessed, is $49.50 per acre or portion or subdivision thereof. We have a 5-member board of supervisors that are elected by landowners within our boundary, and they oversee our operations, our budgets, how we do business, and we meet once a month to discuss a wide range of topics on those lines. Our storm role, obviously, we play a very important role in addition to coordinating South Florida Water Management. Several days out from a projected landfall, the Lake Worth Drainage District will be coordinating with other agencies like South Florida Water Management, Palm Beach County Emergency Management. The week before, LWDD will begin a pre-storm check of our system. We kind of stop our normal maintenance operation and we send our crews out to look at our water control structures, to make sure they're functional, to take a look at canals or culverts or bridge crossings over our canal network to make sure that there are no obstructions to the flow. They will clear any potential blockages that they find to allow the people to water. We have a automated telemetry system that actually operates our water control structures in real time via computer. It's called the SCADA system. It stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. It runs 24 hours a day, all the time. We can monitor it from any location, literally in the world, and not only monitor it, we can affect operation changes if we need to. But if for some other reason, there's a potential problem, we can make manual adjustments as well. And that's the way we operated the system between 1915 and 2017. 13 36 to 24 hours prior to landfall, when the canal levels have been lowered, Lake Worth Drainage District may give permission to communities and businesses with operable structures to open those structures and lower the level in their stormwater ponds. This gives you additional storage capacity for the rains that are anticipated. And then you close them, and then throughout the storm, Lake Worth Drainage District continually monitors, provides outreach, instructions, and updates via social media, via our website, and via direct email. But we're here 365 days a year, but every day of that year, we're working to ensure that the flood control system functions when we need it. It takes a lot of maintenance to make sure that a tree isn't going to fall over into our canal, or that sediment hasn't built up to obstruct a roadway crossing, bridge, or culvert. And that work happens all year long. Depending on the state of a canal, rehabilitation projects may include removal of vegetative encroachments, removal of structural and non-structural encroachments that may be in the way, that might preclude us from reacting in an emergency. Obviously, the dredging of the canal channel is important. Reshaping or reconstruction of the canal bank is also an important function. These regular maintenance activities are for flood control, and we apply them also to our flood control structures, where we're looking at electrical and mechanical components that need to operate in an emergency. Now we talk about Tier 3, the neighborhood system, and this is the system that most of you on the call this morning deal with on a daily basis. They're residential associations, neighborhoods or collectives of landowners, and businesses, depending on the configuration of your particular area. The community's role in dealing with stormwater is just as important as the local Lake Worth Drainage District role and South Florida Water Management District. Just like your roadway system, you can have a traffic jam because something happened on Interstate 95. You can have a traffic jam because of something that occurred on Southern Boulevard or State Road 7, second tier of the roadway system. You can also have a traffic jam in your local community because a tree falls over and people can't get out. So all three of those tiers have to function in order to avoid traffic tie-ups, and in a similar fashion, in order to avoid flooding problems. So for the community's role, several days out from landfall, it's important that you monitor the weather for tropical developments, keep track on the forecast. Contact your property manager or drainage committee member to verify who will open the weirs and who will be the contact for us, Lake Worth Drainage District, during the storm. It's also important to know if you've got the keys to locks on gates, to equipment that you may need to rake clear an inlet of debris, those types of things, and that you identify the proper people that'll have that responsibility. 72 to 48 hours from landfall, take a look at your property. Take a look at your storm drains. See that swales are free of debris like trash, leaves, coconuts, etc. 36 to 24 hours, we'll be coordinating with local entities, so be prepared to receive emails and keep track of communications that come from us or others, so that you will be aware when we give permission to open your operable structure to control the level in your stormwater. And then, of course, throughout the storm, continue to monitor local news stations and Lake Worth Drainage District emails, our website for updates. And it's important from a safety perspective, remain indoors until the all clear is given. As we mentioned several times previously, The most dangerous situation that can occur in a flood is people getting in their cars, getting out into the streets, into traffic, and into dangerous or high-risk areas. As far as the current drainage system goes, Lake Worth Drainage District is unique in the state in that we allow two types of discharge control structures. One is passive, that allows water to flow over anytime water exceeds a certain elevation, or they're operable, that you can open a gate and force water out pretty much at any stage. Both can work without human intervention. So I don't want you to come away from this thinking that if you don't open an operable gate, your community's going to flood, because that's not the case. These structures are designed to meet their level of flood protection performance, even if they're not operating. A fixed water control structure is just that. It does not have a mechanism that allows for the manual adjustment of water level. It's a passive weir. The first graphic there on the upper left is an example of that. So you see a culvert that has a wooden board slid in it. That's the control elevation for the lake that's adjacent to that structure. So that when the water level rises above the level of that board, water spills out and goes into our canal system. So if water is an inch above it, it's spilling out. If it's 3 feet above it, it's spilling out. And that structure is designed to provide flood protection for the designed storm without any intervention, human intervention required. The operable control structure has an adjustable plate that can be opened to provide removal of water from storage, primarily for an impending tropical rain event. That if we've had several days of rain like this, and if we were to have a tropical system then come in to potentially impact South Florida, that would be an opportunity where you could open your operable structures with our permission, of course, and bring your lakes down in advance of potential landfall of a tropical system. It's important to recognize these structures are not always easily accessible, and the picture at the bottom right is kind of an example. There is a wheel there that you can turn and raise it, but if you had to do any maintenance or you had to go in and do any restorative work, you have to pull that grate off and get down in that concrete box to do that. So they're not always easy to get to. Here's a cross section of that. They're very complicated structures because oftentimes they combine various functions. But basically the idea that you see that center plate that has the bleed down orifice, the basic function is you raise that, pick it up so it opens from the bottom, and then water goes underneath the gate to go out of the structure and then out to the canal. And then when you close the gate, you slide it down, and that prevents any water from moving through the structure. It's important you know the location of these structures. It's important that you understand to what degree they may be blocked by debris or vegetation due to lack of maintenance, or if some aspect of that structure is broken, stems broken. If you crank too hard on that wheel, you can break the stem. And because these are locked to prevent vandalism from opening the gate, who has the key? It may be lost. There may not be a duplicate. The person that has the key went on vacation. A lot of things happen. And all of those that I mentioned actually happened in our history. So you don't want to wait till the last minute to understand the conditions of these local drainage systems. So I think with that, you get a break from me talking.
We do. Do we have any questions for the chat box? I answered a couple while you were talking. One was what SCADA meant. And how we notify them through emails.
Great question.
If we don't have any, I think that we will resume, to give everybody a chance to go to the restroom, and we will resume at, what is that, 11:15?
Yeah.
10 minutes.
Okay, we're unmuted and we're ready to go.
Ready to get started again. Okay, well, thanks for everybody that's come back after the break. We're going to talk now about flooding factors and considerations need to be made during flooding. One of the questions you get is, why do we have flooding? Why does it still flood today? And it's kind of a complicated question because, you know, from an engineering perspective, you could design a drainage system that would not flood. But the problem is, it would be inordinately expensive. It would, you know, by many orders of magnitude, increase the cost of building a home or a business, et cetera. So it's really not affordable from an engineering perspective to prevent flooding. So the focus of the system, and this is nationwide, is to reduce the probability of flooding, particularly the high events that we refer to as a 100-year flood. Again, it's a 1% chance of occurrence, but, you know, it works out. You know, it happens once every 100 years, and that's not an unreasonable risk to have. But there are several factors that contribute to the causation of flooding that we want to talk about today. One obviously has to do with rainfall. Seasonal rainfall in Florida varies dramatically. And you can have large quantity of rain over a short period of time that can overwhelm the system. So in other words, you think about 6 inches of rain. In a normal scenario where that rain occurs over 24 hours or 48 to 72 hours, 6 inches of rain is not a big problem. It may flood some streets, but, you know, within a few hours it's gone. But if you have 6 inches of rain within an hour, that is very intense, and virtually no drainage system can handle that without some level of flooding. So that's an example of how rainfall variability can impact a community's flood control system. And a good example of this was what we call a no-name storm that occurred in the winter, again, the dry season of 2014. It dropped 22 inches of rain in about 18 hours. So less than 24 hours, you had 24 inches of rain, and it centered it right on top of, if you're familiar where Kings Point is, literally right on top of that area. And it resulted in extreme excessive flooding. And it was totally unforecast. The forecast for that afternoon was 2 inches of rain. So it gives you an example of the variability that forecasters are faced with and the uncertainty they're faced with, and the possibility, literally at any time, that you could have a major flood develop. Soil saturation is critical in Florida. We live on very sandy soils. We live on an area that has a relatively high groundwater table. Now that's good, you know, from the standpoint of withdrawals of water for water supply into our homes and businesses. But that lens of fresh water can move up or down in the soil very rapidly. And our drainage systems rely on having some ability of the ground to take in, soak in water from rainfall. If that water can't soak into the ground, it results in ponding or standing water, like you see in the picture in the upper right. So our soil is intricately tied to the function of our storm systems. the age of a development has a very important role to play. I mentioned the Clean Water Act coming into play in the 1970s, where in an effort to address water quality, the Clean Water Act also addressed storm and flood factors. However, anything constructed prior to that didn't have to meet those requirements or those thresholds. And so that puts them at a higher level of risk of flooding than communities that were constructed after implementation of the Clean Water Act. Older neighborhoods may not have the kind of community drainage systems that are required today. They may not have the degree of stormwater ponds or places for stormwater to go to avoid damage. And they're older, and of course, if there hasn't been maintenance performed on the drainage system, that is going to further exacerbate the system. And the picture at the lower left is kind of an example where vegetation got out of control in one structure. They managed to cut the trunks of trees off, but I can promise you that structure can't be operated in that configuration. Street flooding is something we deal with in South Florida on a regular basis. As I mentioned earlier, streets and open areas are designed to hold some level of water, which to me and you means it's flooded. But there can be things that happen that exacerbate the flooding in the streets, and that is if drains are clogged, etc.
Ready?
We got a little video of this I can show you.
This is the high water line right here. You can see the leaf debris right in front of the truck. And as you move out, you'll see the water line right now. It is receding. Water line right now is here. It's hard to see on the cell phone. But right now, the cell phone right in here is, but right in here is the water level. So we're going to march out here. I've got my video guy here. He's terrific. His name is David. David, we're not here. David's going to film what's going on here. This is how deep this is. David's been out deep before I came out to see how deep this is. If you go down here, you can see my legs, and my legs are at least a foot deep. Fortunately, the rain has just let up a little bit, so we might be able to get this shot in. Over here, this is storm drain. It is full of leaf debris. You can see it swirling some, it's denting some. But if we go down and pull up the leaf debris, push more up, even more. This is why you want to keep your area clean of vegetation. You keep these inlets clean. Because if you don't, street flooding will occur. That you clean your area, that you get rid of your leaf material throughout the community. Rake it, bag it, and get rid of it. Absolutely.
Thank you. That was our former Lake Worth Drainage District engineer, Pat Martin, doing that informational video. He's a great engineer. It's a good example of some of the simple things that occur that exacerbate flooding. You can imagine, he had a lot of little leaves and grass debris, but you can imagine what would happen if you had a palm frond lay over that inlet. It would totally shut down the ability for it to drain, and you probably wouldn't see it if you drove by it. So this is an example of things during and after a storm that you can look into to see if you can make the flooding situation any better. So what can you expect with different magnitudes of rainfall? Now, One of the frustrations I have personally with local weather forecasts is that they don't often tell you how much it's going to rain. They'll say it's a 40% chance, it's a 20% chance, it's an 80% chance. But they don't tell you, am I going to expect 4 inches of rain, 8 inches of rain? They're getting better, some of them are starting to do it now. But that's an important factor, certainly as water managers, and that's why I rely on South Florida Water Management District and the National Weather Service websites, because they have areas that maps that tell you for a given day, 24 or 72-hour period, how much rain you can expect. So if we were to have, let's say, 5 to 6 inches of rain in a 24-hour period, what would you expect? This picture kind of represents that. You expect there to be standing water in yards, and swales, and ditches, and in streets. The grounds of residential communities should remain dry and passable, but you would see water edging out into the street. And in some communities, you might actually see the crown of the road go underwater. If 7 to 9 inches of rain is received, in this case, it's a 72-hour, 3-day period. Residential communities, swales, roads, lawns, driveways will be flooded. And it's designed to flood that way for a 72-hour storm. However, there shouldn't be water in the finished floors of homes. You should be dry, and the area up around your home should be dry. It's important for rainfall magnitudes in this area. If you have cars parked down the street, you can pull them into your driveway, because the risk of the car flooding gets higher and more and more rainfall. If you get 15 to 23 inches of rain in a 3-day period, however, you could expect there to be some areas where houses or businesses may experience flooding of the finished floor. Again, this is excessive rainfall. It exceeds, in many cases, the design of the stormwater systems, but they can occur. As I mentioned, we had 22 inches in 18 hours there around Kings Point. There was water in homes during that event, some of the older areas.
How were we back then?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
So you have to always be aware that you can have rain events that exceed the design capacity of the storm, almost regardless of the season. I know we won't have some, if you have any questions, now is a good time, but I just want to talk about this photograph. This is an example of what happens in a major storm event, but it shows how the system is supposed to function. You see water in the roads, you see water in the yards, you see the lake in this development completely full, but none of the houses flooded. And so the drainage system did exactly what it was supposed to do under this scenario. It is an inconvenience, and it is a risk. But generally, these systems recover within 24 to 48 hours, so that you can get back in the street, you can get back to the grocery stores, you can get back to your businesses. But when the system right after a major rainfall event looks like this, the best thing and the safest thing you can do is stay in your house and avoid getting out in the streets where you could run the risk of injury through accidents or other.
Tommy, I don't have exactly a question, but a comment.
Okay.
Maybe you have some input.
Sure.
It says, from my Navy experience, I learned that inlet grates or any kind of drain, quote, strainer, need to be substantially oversized compared to the normal pipe flow or collection volume.
That's a really good point. Now, and to that point, most developments, certainly all new developments in Palm Beach County meet the standard, that they follow county standards for roadway drainage design, which are almost always taken from Florida Department of Transportation roadway design features. And just what you described are built into the design of this system. Again, like the video Patrick had showed, even with some leaves on that, there was still water flowing through it. It wasn't that the system didn't function at all, but it wasn't functioning as well as it could if it were completely clean. But really good point. Those drains should be, and in general cases, are designed over-designed relative to debris that might clog it. But like I said, all it takes is one pom-pom.
Okay.
And if you, talking engineer stuff here, so I apologize, but if you look at a major thoroughfare in Palm Beach County, the drains on the side of the street are completely open. They're built into the curb. There is no break. And so there is nothing that can clog up a grate on these major 4-lane thoroughfares. City streets, however, have these typical grates like you saw in the video, which are subject to clogging. And those are, by DOT standards, a little bigger than they need to be to accommodate some level of debris, but it's something you have to pay attention to.
I have another comment that came in. Flooding directly at exterior walls of homes is not usually caused by drainage system failure, but by slope at the wall, gutters around the gutters, ground cover, and at the wall, etc.
Yes, absolutely correct. There are a lot of things can happen to your homes that would cause flooding within the home. And to that end, the federal flood insurance agency, FEMA, has very specific guidelines that they cover flooding in the house, but only if it comes up from the yard. In other words, if water levels rise and then go into the house, the FEMA flood insurance covers it. However, if it comes from the top down, over the roof, or from the side of a building that has a gutter or something like that that's not operable, those insurance policies typically don't cover that. So it's really important to recognize that flooding in your house can come from several different sources, and it's good to be aware of all of those. Any others? That's okay. So now we'll talk about maintenance. And this slide references flood control is not rocket science. You saw from that example of Patrick out in front of his yard, debris, something very simple can contribute to flooding in a neighborhood. There's some good ideas that should be applied, and these are some, they're not all of them, and we support and help anybody that wants to look at unique or ways to coordinate drainage. But creation of a drainage committee is a good idea. It gives you some resource to provide inspection and maintenance of the community system. It ensures internal control structures, swales, drains, and outfall pipes have unobstructed flow. The members of the committee should be year-round residents, since rainfall in South Florida happens all year long. Even in the dry season, we can have floods. And also be physically fit to operate the control structure and navigate the lake and canal lanes. Drainage committees may consist of one or all the following: board members of the community, residents, and property managers. Each of those individuals have expertise and knowledge that can come to bear in improving the function of the drainage system. And then, of course, register online with us at the district's website, LWDD.net, so that we know who you are and have contact information so we can reach you in an emergency to deal with potential flooding.
This is our video.
Okay, we got a video for you.
Hi, we're the Lakewood Drainage District. We made this video to show you various types of structures that we have within the Lakewood Drainage District. If after you watch this video, should you find yourself unfamiliar with your system, please feel free to call and schedule an appointment. Prior to storm season, we'll be coming out to discuss any questions or concerns that you may have regarding your drainage system. For those communities which have operable structures, we have a dedicated storm line. The number is 561-495-4054. Feel free to call this number anytime you feel your community is threatened by a storm. Okay, we're at the public shopping center at the corner of Woodwright and John Road. And this is a retention area. Water comes off the roofs, off the parking lot, through this flow, and into this, what they call a dry retention area. It flows down this swell area towards this control structure. This is a control structure that is basically a fixed structure. There's no operation. As you can see, you can't see the hole at all. That's because it's covered up with grass and weeds, a little bit of dirt. That's restricted. The water can't get out as fast as it should. And that's one of the reasons that you see this debris on top of the grate. The water flowed down towards that bleeder. Couldn't get through it, so it built up and went over and through this grate. And this type of structure you probably need to check even more often than others, probably once a month. You probably need to come out here and make sure this is clear, especially before it rains. So, clear, keep this clean, and that's about all you need to do. Now you can see why it's important to regularly come out and inspect the control structures, because it's really difficult to get this lid off. And you'll find in a lot of cases when they need this open, it's in an emergency situation and you're wasting time trying to remove the lid. So maintenance is key. I got my shovel too. I can grab my shovel too. And that thing's gonna slip off. All right. This is for informational purposes on maintenance for your weir structure that's installed inside the control structure here. These are going to be very difficult for you to do because they're heavy drain grates that are on top here. And you got to be very careful when you remove these to be able to maintain the bleeder notch that's inside here. You'll find that in a lot of cases, the bleeder notch will be clogged with some debris. It's not maintained properly. So this would be your first step in a line of defense against your lake system from flooding. What you want to do is have a device similar to this to be able to lift up these drain grates, but it's very important that you move them in the proper direction. They are quite heavy because should they fall down in there, it's not fun to get them off. And we've all been there. So after you remove them, you'll be able to actually look down into your structure and be very careful not to fall in here because it's rather deep. There's a bleeder notch at this point, and it's actually operating, and what it's doing is it's allowing the water to leave the site and enter into the canal system through a fixed position at the bleeder notch. And in most cases, you'll find this bleeder notch will be clogged with debris. Right now, it's good and clear, so there's nothing from preventing the water to leaving the site. So this is a well-maintained structure. There's nothing blocking it at this point. The second part, we've already removed the gate, made sure that the bleeding notch is clear, but another very important item to consider is a maintenance program for the operation of the butterfly valve that's inside the control structure. This is utilized during the emergency release to allow floodwaters to go to the canal system at an unregulated rate or a faster rate. You'll notice that the community is required to keep it locked. They have a key on site, whether it be the property managers or somebody with the board of supervisors for the community. And during times of flood events, with the authorization of the Lake Worth Drainage District, they're allowed to unlock this chain and utilize this butterfly valve and open it, so they can allow for the discharge of water at a faster rate if they're experiencing flooding conditions. And again, it's with the authorization of the Lake Worth Drainage District. During emergency situations, you'll find yourself scrambling for the key or something like that. Nothing's working. You have a pair of these. This is what we call a master key. You have that handy readily available. At least at that point, you can always replace the lock at a later juncture. But back to the maintenance aspect of it, you're going to want to enter into some sort of program with your maintenance providers, discuss some quarterly hearing, maybe 4 times a year, once a month, a couple times a year, definitely prior to the storm season. You want to be able to come out here and exercise this structure to make sure the valve is working as it's intended to do so. And feel free to call on our inspector if you want to come out and we can go over the motions with you to make sure that everything's operating as it's intended to do. We can give you that advice. Another thing to keep in mind is you're exercising this gate, not to over tighten it or over close it, because you can actually break the threading or break the sleeve that runs this. We're finding that sometimes could be the case. So if it's really difficult for you to operate, there's more than likely a problem. Okay, we're going to take you through a scenario now, and what we're going to do is we're in storm mode. We're actually having a flooding event. One of the most critical things for you to determine is to whether or not your water is higher than the canal water. Obviously, if the canal water is higher and you open up the operable weir, what in essence you will do is flood your property at a faster rate, which you do not want to do. So the first most critical important thing for you to do is determine whether or not you have positive outfall to our system. And in essence, what I'm saying is that your water is higher than the canal water itself. Without positive outfall, it could negatively impact you. Once you have determined that you have positive outfall and you have the authorization from the Lake Worth Drainage District to open the emergency structure, at that point, that would be recommended. It's called a screw gate. In this case, the wheel, the operating mechanism is below the grate, so you have no option but to remove the grate. So once again, as Doug mentioned before you do anything, make sure you have positive outfall, meaning that the water on the lake side of the weir is higher than the water on the canal side of the weir. If it's not, then pretty much don't have to do anything more. Just leave the positive outfall. Once again, here we have to remove a grate. We need to go to even get to the operating mechanism. Once again, check and make sure you're sliding it along the supports. In most cases, you can only slide it one way, because if you slide it the other way, it's going to fall down into the control structure. Lift up, slide it along the supports. And as you can see right now, there's a little water coming through the bleeder. And once again, this bleeder appears to be in good shape, not clogged. But that's, to reiterate what Doug said, it's always important to make sure your bleeder stays outside. We can show you there's some staff gauges that are installed inside this control structure. And you'll notice it'll give you some elevational readings, which it's critical. Sometimes we need to know what's your water at. And you can report to us, we're experiencing at this point 1650 water on the upstream side, and downstream we're right at elevation 16. So you're seeing where there's going to be 6 inches of difference in elevation. That'll also help you in determining whether or not you have positive outfall. The higher the number, obviously, the higher the elevation, the lower you can tell that the water's flowing down. In this case, similar in nature, accepted. In this case, the entire gate is going to come up. In the previous instance, it was just a butterfly valve located within a concrete wall. So you're not going to see anything other than additional turbulence maybe in the structure as you open the butterfly valve. And this one, you can actually see the gate rising. And as it rises, the water is going to go underneath the slide gate at a faster rate, allowing your legs to drain quickly. Generally speaking, the thing everybody remembers, lefty loosey, righty tighty. Turn it to the left to open, turn to the right, close. And I have to say that is in most cases. I have found a couple cases where it is the exact opposite, where you have a rising step, but that's very, very rare. In most cases, it's going to be lefty loosey, righty tighty. And now I'm back to the closed position. Remember what we discussed. You don't want to over-tighten it, because you can do damage to the nylon bushing that actually serves on the stem that lifts it up. It's just a threaded stem with a threaded bushing. If you put too much pressure on it, it'll strip it. And once you strip it, then the damage is done. You'll have to do some repairs to the structure, which obviously will be costly. One other important note is you can see the lake here is tied directly to the control structure. So this community subdivision has several lakes, and not every lake has a direct tie to our canal system. So it's very important to also ensure that the interconnects, the pipes that connect lake to lake to lake, that eventually gets to the lake that goes to our canal, that those interconnects are kept clear, free flowing, because if they're not, then some internal lake that is not connected to a lake that's connected to the control structure will flood. And the people around that particular lake will flood. So keeping those internal pipes clean is very important. This is an example of a flashboard riser, and the reason why they call them flashboard risers is because down here in the water you'll see there's a board. The most important thing you need to do with these flashboard risers, obviously, is to keep them maintained from any debris getting in front of them, because the water needs to flow during storm events. I have an industrial type potato rake that gets the material out from in front of it, and you'll see as I'm cleaning it, there's something in front of it here that I'll just pull it out and move it. You'll also notice that the structure's been retrofitted with these PVC grates. And the reason that they're here is because it appears that there may be some carp kept within this lake system for the vegetation control, as opposed to using chemicals to treat the aquatic weed vegetation. And I think that they're required by permit to have those in place to keep the carp from actually leaving the site. I mean, here's a good example of some debris that's in front of the control structure that could render it clogged during times of heavy storm events. During storm events, you're going to find out that the water may actually be up into this area here. So it's going to be very difficult for your maintenance personnel to come out and take care of the situation at hand, should there be some clogging in front of this. So what you want to do is, prior to the storm event, come out, give a visual inspection, clean any debris that's in front of it, and then continue to monitor it through the storm event. Obviously, if it's a serious storm with a hurricane and things of that nature, you don't want to have your personnel out here. Let the system do what it needs to do. Seek shelter, make sure you're in a safe location, and then after the storm goes away and it begins to subside, come back out, reevaluate, re-inspect the structure, make sure there's no debris in front of it, and continue on with your daily operations. in a community that has a more standard 60 to 80 foot road right of way, sidewalk, road, and then a swell system to collect the water off the lots in the road, drains into the swell, and into this catch basin, which collects water and takes it to the lake. As you can see, this swell is in pretty good shape, except for that large planting right in the middle of the swell. That, as you can see, significantly obstructs the flow. It comes down the swell to this basin. And, it is going to slow down the flow. It cause a flooding issue. And it's not an ideal situation in having your swells if your roads are set up. See, one more thing, these catch basins can sometimes get clogged with debris, whether it be grass clippings, leaves, sticks, anything of that nature. And if these grates get covered up with debris, the obvious thing is they won't accept the water and your streets and homes will flood. So it's very important that these grates remain clean of all debris.
Yeah, great. Okay, that was really good. I enjoy watching that video every time.
Me too.
But those three gentlemen, by the way, are our field inspectors. And that, what you saw there is kind of what they do on a day-to-day basis, patrolling their respective geographic areas and looking for particular problems that may jump out. As you saw, it's not easy to open up and look at those structures to see if they need any kind of maintenance. We don't perform that as a typical duty, but if you have problems, you can call us and we can get one of our inspectors out there to help you walk through it so you can find the best way to open your structure and deal with it. During a hurricane, we encourage you to report flooding issues on our website. You can email us at EOC, that stands for Emergency Operations Center, at LWDD.net. You can call our main office phone number and then follow they'll work you through a series of if this, press the number, and you'll get to our emergency line. A lot of times in a major event, everybody is either in the event or they're on the phone, so you may not get a live person. But I promise you what will happen is we'll get a number of us get the voice recording that you would leave for us. And in some cases, it's transcribed into an email. So if I don't have time to pick up a phone and listen, I can look at my email and see what's going on. And that we'll have people addressing that. And you will get a call back at some point, but it may not be instant. And of course, if it's a life-threatening situation, always call 911 first. We are not an emergency safety response organization. 911 gets you to the county sheriffs, it gets you to paramedics, it gets you to fire departments, all of which are specifically designed to handle life-threatening emergencies. So if you have a situation that's dangerous or you think may become dangerous, call 911 first, then contact us.
That's it.
And that's it. And so again, we appreciate any questions. Obviously, we're glad to answer them. And again, we thank you so much for attending and being part of this. It's a way for all of us to ensure that the residents within your communities, within our district, within the South Florida region are safe as they can be during dangerous hurricane. So with that, I thank you very much.